outlaw shaver here, and wasn't that all that long ago that I saw you last. Had a good St. Patrick's Day, and thought I'd come back and have another shave. It's been a couple of days anyway, and time to get it cleaned up again. But wanted to take some time tonight to officially introduce a soap to you that I've had it out for a couple of weeks, but it had been pretty much, in my opinion, long overdue. And I really wanted to do something special and get it just right. But good friend of mine, Jeffrey Smith, this is for him, Chisholm Trail. I'd asked Jeffrey what kind of ideas he had about a soap that he would like for himself, and he really liked the idea of something that was smoky with a little bit of leather in it, and we come up with Chisholm Trail. So it's not an offensive smoky smell by any means. It's almost more like a cologne in a way, but of course that is if you can appreciate those kinds of smells. I grew up with things like that, my granddad's smokehouse, or out in the shop, you would smell the smell of wood smoke and creosote, and it brings back memories. But a lot of the scents that maybe a cowboy might have smelled would be very similar. They were surrounded by everything leather, and they had to, their saddles and their bridles, all their tack, their boots and their chaps, and when they were riding through the brush, leather is about the only thing that would last. So anyway, it's a good. You can smell the leather in there. You can smell the wood smoke and the creosote. And it's not for the tame, in my opinion, but if you dig those kind of smells, then I really think you'd enjoy it. It may be a love-hate, and who knows, maybe everybody would love it, but that's what I'm going to shave with tonight. But just a little bit more about Jeffrey. Jeffrey is one of the very first guys that ever bought any soap from me, and I think I'd sent him some samples at one time, and he comes back and puts in a pretty good size order. I guess he liked it that much, and he's been a loyal customer ever since. And I just have to say, he's one of the first guys also that I started watching myself when I got into wet shaving, and I've always appreciated his mild-mannered videos that he puts out. Very informative. He experiments with a lot of different things. He has a lot of different things to try out and show us how they're used, and I think he's done quite a lot for the wet shaving community, for showing new products or even vintage products. But one thing I do know that he likes is these shavettes. And so in his honor for this, I'm going to go ahead and use my shavette. I've only got one shavette, but it's this one here, one of these Shear Matakis. They're a pretty neat little contraption. It actually takes a full blade. You don't have to break it in half. Of course, there's some advantages and disadvantages to this. The advantages being able to use a full blade and really no danger, I should say, of snapping one in half or having to keep up with half blades. But the disadvantage that I have found is that because the head is somewhat wide on it, it's a little awkward sometimes to use. But I'm going to go ahead and give that a shot again tonight. I have actually kind of fallen in love with straight razors myself, but let's see what we can do with it. I know these can be a little more tricky, and I would have to say that after shaving with a straight razor, that the guys that have mastered the shavette probably, I would say they're probably even more talented than me, because really they are a little more tricky, in my opinion. They just, you're dealing with such a sharp edge on that double-edged razor blade. I put a Wilkinson sword Gillette blade in there, one of the blades that are made in India, and I really enjoy those in a double edge, so I'm going to try that in here. Go ahead and get started up. I'm going to use probably about, let's see, about this much. That's probably way too much. I'm just doing a face lather today. I'm not going to do a head shave, but I'll smear that down in the bowl and get started with it. What I have found is if I just take the time to smear it around a larger area, you don't get near as much of a chance of little pieces of soap that don't go into the mix before it gets too wet. I usually just, I don't know if you can see that, I spread it all over, get it pretty thin if I can. And it's not so much any trouble with my later formulation, because the later formulation is a little softer. But earlier on, when I first started, the soaps were just a tad bit harder. And what I found is that if you take the time to smear that around the bowl a little bit more, it works just a bit better. Go ahead and get my brush. This is one of those Cynthia brushes. It's a solid brass handle with chrome. It is a synthetic knot, and I would say that for as small as it is, it's very efficient. Get that wet up, and give it one good shake, and that's about all I do with it. I usually leave a fair amount of water in, and as you can see, it already just exploded. A good friend of mine, Nathan Herrera, I was talking with him today, and he says that just for kind of kicks and giggles, he went back and compared some of the first formulation that I'd ever released with this new formulation. He says that it is an improvement on the lathering as well as the slickness and cushion, and that's good to hear. I mean, I'm somewhat limited on my water, so I do like to get opinions back from people as to how it's working for them, and I really think that it's doing what it should do, or what I intended it to. Let me go ahead and get started up here. And I just really love the smell of this. It's probably kind of hard to describe the scent to someone who is younger. Maybe they haven't experienced some of these scents. One thing it reminds me of is smoked cork, like they used to put on the old fiberglass fishing poles. Stuff from, maybe the 1940s through the 1960s. And I know that may be no longer something that they do, but what they did is they used natural cork for handles. And anytime you smoke something or get any kind of a creosote content in it, it actually preserves wood, it preserves leather. The Indians actually used to hang their buckskins in their teepee above where the smoke would come out the top, and they would smoke their hides that way to make them both waterproof or water resistant and to last much longer. You know, they didn't have the tendency for rot. Well, to some people, I'm sure that the smell of smoke is offensive. I just don't. It doesn't bother me that way. You know, actually, it just brings back memories. But I'll go ahead and get started here. Well, I'll tell you what, the first time I ever used this, I nicked myself all up with it. Part of it was being a little bit timid from it, I think, and not having the practice of how to hold the angle on it or to feel the blade. And yes, you do feel the blade, but pretty soon you become familiar with that. And actually, that's one of the things why I really enjoy straight razor shaving now, is because I can feel that blade. It's not an irritating thing, it's just, you know, it's there. And it tells you, the feel of it tells you what to do with the pitch of the angle on the blade. And if you pay attention to it, you know when it's cutting, you know when it's digging, or when it's about to bite you. Much more enjoyable than the first time. Of course, I have to attribute that to a little bit of practice now. When you go to search for half blades on the internet, or say even on eBay, to use in your shavettes, there are quite a few that offer the Wilkinson sword and a half blade, and I can see why. You know, they do seem to be a nice smooth blade for a shavette. Now, I'm going to take my second pass, still with the grain on this. That blade is cutting close enough that I think it'll be a very nice shave without doing an against the grain pass with it. Get a little more water on there. What's odd right now is I can actually feel just a little bit more sensitivity to the skin using that shavette than I usually do when I'm using the straight razor. But the key with this seems to be to go much more lightly. I still think that I would enjoy a narrower head on these and just using the half blade. The pitch of angle on this is a little more challenging, I think. One thing I've noticed too about this head being heavier like it is a cast aluminum, I don't get very much audible feedback from it. Well, let's go ahead and wash this off and see where I might need to trim up a little closer. And take just a little bit right here. And just a little bit right here. Well, that was a nice shave. And something a little different to go back and use the shavette. So tonight's shave was Shear Mataki with a Wilkinson sword blade, Gillette Wilkinson sword, Chisholm Trail, which is smoky wood and campfire and leather. The leather is somewhat kind of like a saddle leather. And that was for my friend Jeffrey Smith. You ought to go over and check out his channel if you haven't seen him yet. Very entertaining, very interesting person, and he rolls out the content like nobody can do. He's very consistent, very meticulous, and I appreciate every minute that he spends in giving us something to watch. So anyway, thank you all for joining me, and if you haven't yet, go check out Jeffrey's channel, subscribe to it. You won't regret it. Thank you.